This is a cash for votes manifesto. How will you respond? As your critics are calling it, it's a cash for votes manifesto.
I'll say you're wrong. Cash for votes was most appropriate when the Prime Minister announced the PM Kisan. A paltry 2,000 rupees, but timed just before the election, and a promise of a second installment just before the voting. That is cash for votes. What we are announcing is schemes that will be implemented over a period of 5 years post-election. We're not promising any cash at the time of election. The Prime Minister had promised and is implementing that promise.
You're promising the cash handouts as part of your election manifesto.
Absolutely.
So in that sense, you're promising voters that if there's a Congress government elected, we will give you a certain amount of cash.
Yes.
In this case, 72,000 per year to the bottom 20% poor families of the country, whom you're measuring as 5 crores. Now that will be seen by some as cash for votes.
Of course it will be. People who don't have a heart, people who are callous, people who consider the poor as dirt. We think that the first charge on the resources of this country belongs to the poor. And if there are 20% of India is very poor, as we think they are, 72 years after independence, and all governments have to share responsibility, we think the time has come to make a frontal assault on that poverty, and therefore we are rolling out a scheme after careful thought. If some rich people, some armchair critics think this is cash for votes, let them think so.
No, in fact, the opposite, the government says this is not Garibi Hatao, this is Garibi Badao. You will continue with what is described as povertarian economics. This is dole economics. This is incentivizing people to stay within that, within below 12,000.
Which means they have not read the literature on UBI. They have read nothing.
You mean the Universal Basic Income Scheme?
Or
adaptations
of UBI. There's massive literature. These schemes have been tried in other countries. The results have been documented. Eminent economists have written about it. If no one in the government has read that literature, no one in the government has spoken to any of those economists, I can only be sorry for this country.
The reason I'm focusing on NYAY is because presumably it's the showpiece of this manifesto, this whole minimum income guarantee scheme. Economists are divided on it. There are those who believe it is unviable, fiscally irresponsible, and straight dole economics.
Tell me an issue on which economists are not divided. Tell me.
No. The fact, Mr. Chidambaram,
no, you're not answering my question.
Do you concede that identifying, in the first place, identifying the beneficiaries, the 20% poorest families is a huge challenge. And the scheme cannot take off without proper identification in the first instance.
I'll answer that.
Yes.
I'm glad you asked the question. When the government announced the Ayushman scheme and said we will identify and give it to 10 crore families, did you ask them this question? How are they going to identify 10 crore families which are eligible under Ayushman? They are the poorest families. If the government of the day can identify 10 crore poorest families, our government cannot identify 5 crore poorest families? What logic, my dear friend?
No, it's very interesting that in your manifesto, in fact, you're saying that you will use the existing government schemes like Ayushman Bharat to identify the beneficiaries.
We said we will use existing data available. We will collect data. I'm glad you asked me this question. I'm disappointed you didn't ask this question when Ayushman was announced.
Mr. Chidambaram, you're in a combative mood, but
of course I am.
No, sure. You know, it is believed that you've consulted several economists while unveiling this scheme. Raghuram Rajan, I interviewed him last week. He warned that the scheme will need to be fiscally prudent, will have to perhaps subsume some existing subsidies. You may have to give up some, which worries him.
He also said.
Yes.
He also said it has to be very carefully designed.
That's right.
There has to be a pilot. The results will have to be proven on the ground, and the phase out has to be, and the rollout has to be phased. We accept every one of those limitations.
So in that sense, it's not as if the Congress government comes to power in May, June, if you come to power, on day one you will provide NYAY or 72,000 to these families.
Who said so?
I know.
Read our manifesto.
So therefore, in that sense, you are promising a future which at the moment is uncertain because the scheme has not been fully thought through.
Has Ayushman been fully rolled out? I mean, what kind of questions are these? This is a 5-year government. We have announced a 5-year program. We have upfront said it will be carefully designed by a group of experts, economists, statisticians, etc. There will be a pilot, there will be a testing period of 6 to 9 months. Then the rollout will start. There will be a year 1, there will be a year 2, and thereafter. We have stated it upfront.
The reason, another economist, Dr. Abhijit Banerjee, whom you've consulted, we also interviewed him. He said his original suggestion was for 2,500 rupees per month and do it in a graded manner. Go carefully through it. Your government went straight away and said, we are, or your party is...
I'm glad.
No, I didn't use a slip of the tongue. Your party said 6,000 per month, 72,000 per year. Have you simply thrown a figure without actually going through the fine print of how exactly are you going to balance, where exactly are you going to get the funding?
Well, I'm sorry.
How exactly will this scheme be unveiled?
I'm sorry you have such a poor opinion of our intelligence or industry. We have done our homework. We have consulted economists. We have crunched the data, and we are completely satisfied that over the period of the term of the government, this can be rolled out to cover 20% of the poorest families of India.
How do you respond to the criticism, Mr. Chidambaram, which again a group of economists put out, saying if you want to lift so many people out of poverty, the real answer is faster economic growth, not handouts.
I agree.
The Congress has gone back to the politics of handouts in a way because you desperately want to change the election narrative.
I agree that rapid economic growth is the proven way to lift all people. But it will take a long time. The same people will tell you trickle down will work eventually. What is eventually? How long can the poor wait? And why should the poor wait generation after generation? After independence, there have been 3 generations of families that are abjectly poor. Yes, we have lifted 50% or more out of poverty. When we became independent, the poverty ratio was over 70%. Now it's 20%. In 2004-14, in those 10 years of UPA, we lifted 14 crore families out of poverty. We still have another 5 crore families or 25 crore people who have to be lifted out of poverty. While all the development schemes, all the schemes that will accelerate growth will continue, will be pushed with great vigor, we think, given the size of our GDP, the size of the total expenditure of the Government of India and the states, the time is opportune to attempt a direct cash transfer to the poorest families.
No existing subsidies will be cut.
As I've said, and you read the manifesto, we say subsidies designed with specific socio-economic objectives in mind will not be affected.
We've done a rough calculation, Mr. Chidambaram, very rough after the manifesto, that tells us the minimum income guarantee scheme would cost the budget about 3.6 lakh crores. The government, education which you are saying you will bring to 6% of GDP.
Over 5 years.
Okay, would cost 2.33 lakh crores. Health, 3.23 lakh crores. You are promising a right to health. Plus the additional burden of 22 lakh government job vacancies that you are promising to fill. Total budgetary allocation for 2019-20 is rupees 27 lakh crores. How will you balance the budget?
Your rough calculation is fatally flawed. These targets are over a period of 5 years. The term of the government is not 1 year, my dear friend. The term of the government is 5 years. Read every paragraph, number one. Number two, your denominator is wrong. You are taking today's GDP. The GDP was 32 lakh crore, went to 64 lakh crore after the first 5 years, went to 128 lakh crore, now it's 210 lakh crore. In 5 years, the GDP will become nearly 400 lakh crore. Your denominator is wrong, your denominator is static, which is why it is a rough calculation, very rough, I might say.
Do you concede raising resources for this kind of, for these various schemes that you're promising will be a huge challenge?
No, raising resources is always a challenge for any government. When has raising resources not been a challenge? It was a challenge when R.K. Shanmugam Shetty was finance minister. It is a challenge even today. But the government has to have the will and must have the wisdom to raise resources in a manner that doesn't hurt economic growth, at the same time brings resources for its welfare schemes. That's the art of governance. Raise resources and expand welfare.
I know you've coined this word, wealth and welfare.
Create wealth.
Create wealth.
Guarantee welfare.
Guarantee welfare. Sounds very good. Is this your attempt in a way to change the election narrative? Because the BJP, as you've seen, the Prime Minister has set the narrative in terms of nationalism, at the moment at least. The Congress response appears to be guaranteeing welfare, promoting wealth. Am I correct? That you are trying to shift the narrative, trying to, in a way, move away from the narrative of nationalism?
This is the narrative. This is the narrative of the people of India. 174 consultations. This is, as I said in my remarks, every paragraph here is what somebody has told us or written to us, written, of course, in precise language. The Prime Minister is trying to change the narrative. He's ignoring the narrative of the people and he's creating his own narrative because he thinks that is a tried and tested formula. I'm ashamed that he doesn't address issues of jobs, agriculture, women's security, education, nutrition, healthcare. He doesn't address any of these issues. He goes from state to state. He goes from meeting to meeting. And the only thing he talks about is that I shot down a satellite, I did a surgical strike. I mean,
he spoke yesterday of Hindu terror, for example.
That is another one.
In his meeting in Wardha. Did that push you on the back foot? Because you've been a former Home Minister. When many of these investigations were done, according to him and according to Amit Shah, the Samjhauta Express verdict, for example, is a classic example of the previous UPA government trying to fix terror responsibility on so-called right-wing Hindu groups.
Let me answer. Don't echo whatever Mr. Amit Shah says. I want you to apply your mind and ask questions. Did the Samjhauta Express blast take place or not? Was the Makkah Masjid attacked or not? Was the Ajmer Dargah attacked or not? If they didn't happen, it reminds me of what we heard 10 years ago. No one killed Jessica Lal. These didn't happen, forget it. These happened, right? All right. The NIA has identified the wrong persons. That's the case. They have been acquitted. I believe in the Ajmer Dargah case, 2 have been convicted. Maybe there's an appeal, I don't know. So NIA identified some people, continued the investigation under NDA. The entire prosecution was under NDA, ended in acquittal. Fine. Find the guilty people. What are you in government for? If these are the wrong people, find the right people and punish them, bring them to trial. Remember, 3 people are still absconding. Find them. They may be innocent, they may be guilty, I don't know. But find the 3 absconding people.
But how do you respond to the basic charge that is effectively being made somewhere by the Prime Minister and Amit Shah that the Congress government or the Congress-led government was trying to fix the responsibility on so-called Hindu terror groups, which they say never existed?
Let me say, if you say what the NIA did was the Congress fixing it, then can I turn around and say, when the NIA failed in its case, the BJP unfixed it? Why do you bring the government into it? If the present government is distant from the NIA, why do you say that the previous Congress government fixed it? If we fixed it, they've unfixed it, isn't it? These are irrelevant arguments. The argument is NIA identified certain people, named them in the charge sheet. I think all of them, or -2 or something, have been acquitted. Go find the persons involved.
Do you concede, though, your successor Sushil Kumar Shinde, using a word like Hindu terror, has given the BJP an opening in this election to try and fix the narrative, to shift the narrative into the so-called Congress's soft approach towards terror?
That shows that the BJP is desperate.
And minority appeals.
He used that phrase about 7 years ago. And after 5 years of government, if Mr. Modi cannot talk about jobs, cannot talk about agriculture, cannot talk about education, cannot talk about healthcare, cannot talk about MSMEs, cannot talk about demonetization, cannot talk about the flawed GST, He has to go back 7 years in time and pluck a phrase used by the Home Minister of the day. It shows how desperate he is.